Themeco. Particularly, he's heading the elite team, and we are diving into turning your agency into a site generating machine today. So we're talking all about productivity, we're talking about culture, we're talking about making your team work more efficiently, increasing the ROI on your projects and all that good stuff. Now, without further ado, I would love our guest to introduce himself. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
I can, although I've got a slide for that as well, so I won't go into too much detail. But yeah, I am, as you so eloquently said, Jan, I am Matt Frost. I work for Themeco, which is a WordPress theme company by trade. You may know Themeco from the X theme or Pro theme, and I also head up a business unit within Themeco called Elite, and I will share a little bit about that today.
Perfect. Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself, my beloved fellow Maverick.
Hello. My name is Peter Neri, and I am a UX and design expert as well as a Cloudways Maverick, and currently organizing the Design for Conversions conference that I'll tell you about later. So yes, happy to be here as usual.
Yeah, super excited for your conference as well. I'm definitely making the time for that. My name is Jan Koch. I'm the owner of Virtual Summit Mastery. I'm also organizing a conference, but that's way too far ahead to start pitching it today. We are missing our friend Lee today, unfortunately. He has a clashing appointment, so I have to take on the moderation role. If you are watching the replay, before we dive into that, let us know about that. Type replay in the comments, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered. So one thing we want to highlight during this presentation is that we are here to answer your questions. We are here to serve you. So if you have any questions, just shoot them at us and we'll make sure that we get them answered. Now, Matt, you have a presentation for us today. So let me turn on the screen sharing and we'll mute ourselves and hand it over to you.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, Jan. Okay. So this is all about transforming your agency into a site building machine. So let's dive right in. You might be thinking, who is this guy? And the first thing that you might notice from the bullet points is that it's probably a little bit different to the obligatory things which you normally see at this stage of a webinar. I will say I am not a huge believer in titles, declaring awards and different things like that. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about my experience as to how I've got where I am now, but more to the point, how it's relevant to what we're talking about today. So I started my first business aged 16. I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial streak in me. In fact, I was going around in my local neighborhood selling things like homemade bookmarks and painted eggs, believe it or not. From a very young age indeed. But I started my first business age 16. And at that point, a lot of things were about vanity, if anything, because really what I wanted at that stage was to have a briefcase, wear a suit, and hold a mobile phone to my ear. And this was the 90s when that was a pretty novel thing to do. Needless to say, because my focus was probably more on appearance than about substance, the business didn't last too long. But things were going to change a little bit later on. I worked for a long time in the insurance sector, and then that led very nicely into a business which I set up around accident investigation, during which time I subcontracted work to a number of people and had probably my first real experience in outsourcing work, which I was bringing in and working with other people. And then I set up my own web agency. And you're probably thinking that's a huge shift, going from an accident investigation business to a web agency. And you would be absolutely right. It is a very different business indeed. There were some changes in the state of the investigation or accident investigation market, shall we say. And it kind of led to some things where I thought, well, this is now something that I need to get out of, and I started looking for the next big thing. And the next big thing for me was all about websites, because I'd always enjoyed tinkering, building my own websites, and I felt there was an opportunity to do things in a slightly different way. So I have some experience as a former agency owner, and then eventually I joined Themeco. and took on a number of responsibilities there. And that leads me to where I am now, where I lead a business unit called Elite and have other responsibilities within the business as well as leading our people, particularly our support team, amongst other things. And that's who I am. So all that said, that's quite a lot of information about who I am, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview as to why I'm talking about these things today. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about, I'm not going to rehash everything which was in the webinar notes and things that you've seen on Facebook, but effectively what we're talking about is how you can create a fantastic environment and culture, and how you can put in place the things which are going to allow you to be successful as an agency owner, the things that you need to avoid, and what you need to do instead. And I'll also just pull back the curtain a little bit on some of the things which I do at Themeco, which may be of use to you as you think about what you do in your own business. Okay, so guys, actually, I've got a question for you, so you might need to unmute for this. There's 4 images there. I'll tell you what they are, first of all, so because you might be a little bit confused. And I'm going to ask you what you think these all have in common. So we've got an image there of a hospital or doctors. We've got airline pilots. We have the Mercedes Formula One team, and you have the Themeco team. So I'm wondering, guys, do you have any idea what connects these 4 very, very different
team?
They all have dogs.
I did warn you. There's a very exuberant border collie puppy. So I say team, and after that, I'll mute myself again. I'll mute the dog.
Well, it's good to hear that the dogs are so exuberant, and they have opinions of their own that unfortunately we can't understand. But maybe they were putting in their guess. Jan, have you any thoughts?
I think it's the clear responsibilities that all the team members have.
Interesting. Okay. Well, in a way, you're both right, and kind of heading in the right direction. And it is this. It is a no-blame culture. And you might be thinking, well, what is a no-blame culture? So I will answer that question for you. So in a no-blame culture, first of all, there is a recognition that mistakes happen. Now, I'm not telling you anything groundbreaking here. This is something that everybody knows. Mistakes always happen, but it's really about how those mistakes are handled, how they are viewed within your business, and what you do about them. Now, the fact is, mistakes are rarely caused by a single person. That's not to say as people don't make mistakes. They obviously do. But more often than not, there is a chain of events which causes the problem to occur. And in actual fact, when you think about this from an agency perspective, and you're thinking about, okay, well, if somebody has screwed up, say, something on a website that they are building, well, actually, the first thing that you probably should think about, rather than looking to blame that single person that has made a particular mistake, is the environment which caused them to make the mistake in the first place. Because, like I say, more often than not, there are things which are going on behind the scenes which have led to that mistake being made. It could be that they didn't have clear enough instructions. It could be that the outcomes weren't clearly defined. It could be that they are using a platform which was not appropriate and it was never really explained. So there's various factors which can come into it, and so it's important to recognize that mistakes occur as a part of a system, and rather than just by an individual. So with that in mind, everybody should be able to feel comfortable reporting mistakes. And beyond that, not only should they feel comfortable in reporting mistakes, but they should want to do that. They should feel that the honesty around making mistakes is the most critical thing, and that so they should come forward anytime a mistake happens, because then the way that you handle it is all about solving the problem and not about chastising the individual. Now, it might be that an individual does need to make some changes in the way that they're doing things. But if you just come down on a person for screwing up, then that's not going to help their self-confidence. All they're going to really take from that is that they've done something wrong, and they're going to feel less confident about coming forward when a problem happens again. Now, in the case of some of the other environments that I've mentioned before in that previous slide, in a hospital, when people are focusing on things like surgery, if people did not feel comfortable in coming forward when something goes wrong, then it would more likely result in an even worse outcome, i.e. someone could die. In the same way, when pilots are in a cockpit and they're meant to be working together, if a problem is ignored, that can lead to catastrophic outcomes. So that's why it's very important that people feel comfortable communicating with one another and being open about mistakes that are made. So a no-blame culture is critical to that. One of the characteristics that you'll find in no-blame culture is that the hierarchy of a organization is quite shallow and collaborative, as opposed to very, very strict, kind of dominant, I'm the boss, you'll do what I say, and this is the chain of command, you follow it absolutely, and that's it. What I say goes. You might feel that there is a time and a place for that, but not in a no-blame environment. And the proof of the success of this is perfectly encapsulated in the Mercedes Formula One team, because I think it's a fairly unique thing in that particular industry, and they've won the last 7 world championships back to back. So they're doing something right. The overall thing.
Can I just say, Matt?
Yeah.
If I may just quickly interrupt, from a UX perspective, mistakes don't even actually exist. It's sort of as if we kind of even need to change the term, because it's never a mistake. It's just an opportunity to learn. That is exactly what a mistake is. And you kind of need them, because without them, you can't work out what works and what doesn't work. So in view of no one can be perfect, and in fact, perfection is detrimental to a point, mistakes are actually welcome. They are a good thing from a UX perspective. So that's my grain of thought.
I was just about to reference the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, because that is the book from 2 Navy SEALs who talk about basically practicing extreme ownership and leading down the chain of command. As you said, Matt, sometimes there is time for that, where you give top-down orders and they just have to be executed, but also leading the chain up, so that when your manager makes a mistake and plans a project the wrong way or something like that, you approach them and tell them and take responsibility for recognizing that mistake and trying to find a solution for that. Highly recommend that book.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read that book. It does sound a great source of inspiration and truth. So it might be a good thing for people to take away and go and read. And Peter, I completely agree with you. It's a perfect segue into that last bullet point that I've said there, because mistakes are opportunities to learn. And you're absolutely right that in a UX in the UX discipline, it's critical more than ever that you are testing things out, you are seeing what works in the real world, and you know full well that mistakes are going to be there, that you're not going to have it right all the time, and you have to feel comfortable in that environment, because that is what allows you to learn and grow and come up with the best possible solution. So so I completely agree with you on that. So if that is what a no-blame culture is, we need to then look at, well, how do you actually go about implementing this? So the first thing that I would say is critical is actually choosing to work with the right people. Because if you have the wrong people and you're trying to fit them into a no-blame environment, it just isn't going to work. Cultural fit is absolutely critical. So whether you're looking to hire people, whether it's just choosing to collaborate with partners, whether you're looking to outsource work, finding the right fit, making sure that your values are actually aligned is very, very important. Once you've identified those right people, then it is your job to sell the vision to them. You have to explain very, very clearly what you are looking to achieve, what you're looking for them to help achieve. And it's very much about, it's not about the individual here, it's about the vision for the business or the project. What are we trying to accomplish here? And everybody needs to be on board with that, because if they don't buy into the vision, it's not going to work. So that's why it's really, really important to drive home that vision and make sure that everybody is in agreement on that before you move forward. It can be really helpful to value and incentivize honesty. And that's for the reason which I've already outlined. You need to have honesty so that people feel good about coming forward. And like I said before about having that shallow hierarchy, it's important to recognize that even though a hierarchy might exist, it doesn't mean that somebody who is the business owner or the manager or the team leader, anybody that is necessarily in a position of leadership or managing others, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the authority on everything and they are experts in different things. I do not call myself a web developer. I'm not a web developer, but I have great people on my team that are web developers. So why would I override their experience and try and force through things which are outside of my own level of expertise? So you have to be prepared to defer to other people on your team so that you are very much working collaboratively. And a good thing to think about in terms of, again, very specifically, a no-blame culture is judge performance based on behaviors as opposed to specific outcomes. Now, that's not to say as outcomes aren't important, but if the behaviors are right, then that will lead to positive outcomes. And Peter, you said before about the dangers of perfectionism. I absolutely agree. And I've got a bullet point right there which says that. Accept imperfection, because nobody is perfect. And you need to accept that if you're going to successfully integrate a no-blame culture. And then the important thing as well is to review what you're doing often and be prepared to adapt. It's an evolving thing. It is a living thing. And the people that you are working with will help form and shape that environment. So you set the tone, but you allow people to express themselves. You encourage them to express themselves. You win as a team, and you lose as a team. And I cannot stress that enough, because this is where it all rests on. You celebrate together when things go right, but equally, if things go wrong, then you've lost together collectively as a team. But that's okay, because you can learn from that and you figure out what you can do better next time so that you put yourself as a team back in a winning situation. But it's the team that has won as opposed to the individual. And that's why we don't blame individuals when things go wrong. All right, so I will stop at that point before I move on. Guys, do you have any kind of inputs or anything that you think that we ought to talk about at this stage about no blame cultures?
I think this is such an important topic, and I don't hear people talk enough about this, to be fair. So I see many people talking about how to work together as a team in terms of how do you communicate, how do you set tasks, what tools do you use for project management, how do you plan the projects. What you do when things go south is something that I rarely see people speak about, because that's not a fun topic, to be honest. And from my experience working in the agencies I've worked with, it was very difficult to implement the no blame culture when things went south. And if everything is fine, it's easy to talk about this. And yeah, we all take responsibility. We all lose together and win together. As soon as the project tanks and as soon as things start to go wrong, from my experience, I would see the leaders in my agencies that I've worked for, they would start shifting responsibilities suddenly. They wouldn't take responsibility, but the developer or the designer or whoever screwed up in that situation was to be blamed. And they were responsibility for fixing the situation. So it's hard to walk that walk, but I think it's something that we all should learn.
It
Not
is
only
hard.
that,
Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead, Peter.
Sorry. I'm really interested in the concept of no blame, because as a culture, I live in Spain, and it's a blame culture, and you can tell, and I mean, it's kind of extraordinary. Whenever someone feels like they may have gone wrong, it could be anything. It could be someone giving you the wrong change, it could be anything. You can immediately see how they immediately get defensive. And that is the worst thing possible. And you just think, oh, why are you doing that to yourself? More than to you. I mean, I don't care when they're like, oh, it's your fault because you didn't tell me. I'm like, okay, fine, because I've sort of gone beyond that. But I think that the blame culture is something that is very deeply ingrained in certain societies at large. And it would be so helpful if we managed to eradicate it. So seeing companies that actually build their overall professional ethos over a no blame culture is so refreshing and so wonderful to see.
Yeah, you make a great point there, Peter, because this is something which is, or rather a blame culture is something which is ingrained in societies as a whole. And typically, what I see is that it's more of a Western philosophy than an Eastern philosophy. No blame cultures, I mean, and shallow hierarchies. If you look at how businesses are structured more in the East, it is very much built on blame or shame. There's a much the hierarchy is, I guess, more prolonged, and it does have more of that defer to somebody based on seniority as opposed to defer to them based on their particular expertise and so on. And I'm not saying that this is the only way to run a business. What I'm doing is I'm speaking from experience of things which I've seen work, and if you can successfully integrate a no blame culture, then you can be incredibly successful by doing that. But again, Jan, you made a good point before when you said that the real test of this is when the wheels start to fall off and when things start to go wrong. As a business leader, the way that I approach these situations is that ultimately the buck stops with me. So if something happens, if we do a bad job for a client, well, that's on me. It's not fair to just kind of point to a developer and say, hey, you screwed up on this, fix it. It doesn't work like that.
That is you practicing extreme ownership. Yeah. It's exactly what is outlined in the book.
Well, it sounds as though I've read this book, and honestly, I haven't.
Maybe you were a Navy SEAL in your previous life.
Well, it would have to be a previous life, because I think pretty much anybody that's now looking at me on screen is probably thinking, well, he probably doesn't fit the natural profile for a Navy SEAL.
It wasn't on the introduction slide either.
No, you're right. It wasn't, and it would have been there for sure because it was very comprehensive. So. Yeah. Okay. So, you also, I think you said a few things as well about tools and specific things like that, and those kind of things. I'm going to come on to those a little bit more later on, but I will just say as it relates to tools, I think there is a bit of a tendency that we focus on. Okay, well, what is the best tool for this, and what should I specifically use in this situation? And personally, I think that there's probably too much of a focus on the specific platform or the specific tool, because really what's important, first of all, the best tool is the one that you'll actually use. And secondly, it's not really possible to kind of say definitively what is the best tool without context. I think you need to have context, and you need to be thinking through, okay, well, what am I actually looking to get out of a tool? What do I need from a project management platform? Like, my needs in Themeco might be different than Peter, your needs in your business. And Jan, same with you. What you're looking for in a project management platform might be very different. So I can tell you what I use. Is that going to be the best thing for you? I don't know. There are questions you need to ask. So, but we'll come on to that a little bit more later on. Okay, so let's move on. And I want to ask you a question. And this is for you guys. So what is the least sexy part of a business, do you think?
Accounting.
I was just saying taxes. I was just having a conversation today with my accountant.
Okay. Yeah, that's yeah. Good answer.
Out of the context, probably, but
it's not the. Well, I'm not going to lie. It's not the answer I've come up with.
No, but it's it's unfortunate because I just literally put the phone down with the accountant and came to this. But it is a big part of business, though. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It is. Although, you know, there is an argument. So whilst the accounting side isn't a particularly sexy part of the business, looking at things like, you know, revenue and profits and stuff like that can be a quite attractive thing in a business. So I guess it's a matter of perspective. So I will give you my answer, but just before I do, I will just share with the world that picture that you see there on the right-hand side is a very happy brother of mine from many years ago. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you'll notice that he's reading a book about software for the Commodore 64, a very old platform indeed. So that's just that has nothing to do, by the way, with anything that I'm talking about, but I just thought I'd share it with you anyway. So the answer that I came up with is processes. It sounds like such a dry and dull thing to talk about. And I hate to say it, but I'm going to talk about them. So I'm going to try and make this as not dull and as least dry as possible. So why do processes matter? Well, the fact is that you are following processes all the time, whether you think you are or not, or whether you intend to or not. When you get in the car, you are following a process. For example, you don't normally press the accelerator pedal before you've turned the key in the ignition or pressed your start button, depending on the car that you're driving. When you are making a cup of tea or coffee, then it's or if you're making a cup of tea, then it tends to be a hotly disputed, no pun intended, kind of topic of whether you put the tea bag in before you put the hot water in. Personally, I always put the tea bag in first. Other people do not. But these are processes.
Matt, can I just say that this is a hotly debated topic in the UK, nowhere else. You said one of the most British things you could possibly say. Like, love it.
On that topic,
I'm British.
Definitely. I mean, you're wearing a Union Jack, so yeah.
I felt it was important. You know, we don't get enough international recognition these days. So I thought I would bring a little illumination to proceedings. So anyway.
On that topic of routines and people being used to do things the same way, there is a good question coming from Guido de Grassi. Some people are used to expect blame, and sometimes they leave even if nobody started to blame them. Is there any way to avoid that? What is your take on that, Matt?
Tell me that question again. Just read it back to me again.
Some people are used to expect blame, and sometimes they leave even if nobody even started to blame them. How do we avoid that?
Well, that really comes back to the environment that you've created. If you've got people leaving a business because they are expecting that they're going to get the blame for things, then the environment is wrong. I'd go as far as to say is you've probably got a toxic environment. But this does happen. And the way to address that really has to be about going back to, okay, well, what is the vision? And you've got to sell that vision to people. But you've got to have this attitude from the top down. You can't just call it a no-blame environment and then not act on it. So it's got to be part of that management, and the leader in that business is ultimately the person which has got to set the tone there and set that environment right. Otherwise, you are going to have people that leave because they're expecting to get the blame. So hopefully that addresses the question. But Jan, if I'm going off in the wrong direction, then feel free to put me.
I think it's good, yeah. And Guido is watching, so Guido, if you have more questions around that, just shoot them at us and we'll bring them up as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Questions are good. Okay. So processes matter because people are not mind readers. And I might think, okay, to use my apparently very British scenario, that the best way to make a cup of tea is to put the tea bag in the cup first. But if I don't explicitly tell somebody, right, this is how I want my tea made, then they're going to make it however the hell they like. And then I might get something which I'm not particularly happy about because they made my tea the wrong way. So hopefully that's British enough for you, Peter. But I can try and overload the Britishness a little bit more if that would help. Similarly, there's more than one way to stuff a turkey. Hopefully I'm getting the point across here that people do things in different ways, and what I think is the way to do something is not necessarily the same way as you guys think is the way to do something. And to be efficient at something, it requires a deep understanding of a process. You might think, right, okay, well, I know what I'm doing, and this is how I do things every day, and never had any problems, so that's fine. I'll just keep on doing things this way. And that might work for you to an extent, but that might not necessarily be the most efficient way. In fact, because of the just sheer volume of information which we need to process these days on a day-to-day basis, most of the time, we're not even following the set processes that we think we are following. And so to become efficient at something, it actually requires that you take stock of that process and you actually look at it in the spotlight and say, okay, well, actually, is this working? Can I do this in a different way? And we talked about the whole thing here is really about scaling your business. So what does scalability mean? Well, it means taking what's working and pouring fuel on the fire. Doing more of that. So this is where processes, efficiency, and scalability all converge. And particularly in service businesses, and we're talking about agencies here, which obviously are service businesses, well, in order to scale, you need to have predictability and consistency. You think about every time you go into a Starbucks, or in the UK, a Costa Coffee, or whatever your favorite coffee chain is, and you will see that they are following the same process. The coffee that you drink, your latte, is made in exactly the same way, time after time. And you get a consistent taste and flavor to that. Because if you didn't, chances are you wouldn't keep going back. And from a scalability perspective, when you have that consistency, you know things like how long things are going to take and how much things are going to cost. And if everybody was following their own recipe when making a cup of coffee, it would be very difficult to quantify things like how many beans do I need, and how much is it actually costing me to make a cup of coffee, and so on. And all these things can be absolutely applied in the context of an agency when you are putting together proposals for websites. You obviously need to know how long it's going to take you to build it, how many hours need to go into it, what is the effort. You need to know all the things which need to be done, and processes are the things which are ultimately underpinning that for you. So I'm going to switch gears slightly and tell you about where processes really had a catastrophic outcome. And this, I'm going to take you back to 1988 to Delta Flight 1141, August 31st, 1988, where there was an accident on takeoff, and unfortunately, the picture that you see on the right is what was left of the plane after it had crashed. And the significance of this is that, as I've said before, there are a lot of processes that take place in a cockpit, and there are checklists which are used. And those checklists are there to make sure that certain things are done which enable a plane to fly. When things are not done properly, then you end up with situations like this. And in this particular flight, the crew, the cockpit, the captain and co-pilot were distracted, and they were rushing one of their checklists on the way to the runway. And unfortunately, they missed a vital step. They did not extend the flaps and slats on the wings, and that's a crucial thing which allows the plane to fly. So when they tried to get off the ground, they couldn't climb, and unfortunately, the plane came back down, and many people unfortunately lost their lives. So having these processes in place and actually following them is critical. So I know that's a little bit of a kind of a tangent, but I just want to demonstrate really how catastrophic things can get when processes are not followed. But more critically, from an agency perspective or any small business perspective, when you do not put in place the processes that are required to be successful, you are increasing the risk of your business being unsuccessful and ultimately going out of business. That is the catastrophic outcome that can occur. So, how do we get processes right? Well, it starts with documenting the key things that you do. It doesn't mean documenting every single thing that you do, but certainly you want to start with the key things that you do and the steps that you take. And you can do this in a very straightforward, step 1, put the tea bag in the muck. Step 2, boil the kettle, and so on. Those kind of things. Then once you know how you are currently doing something, ruthlessly refine those processes. You will see the inefficiencies when you start to document them. The other thing then, and this is really now switching to when you are working with other people, and this is, again, very important from a team perspective, that you need to remove any ambiguity about the processes and the steps that need to be taken. So if I said, right, Peter, go make Jan a cup of coffee, but I didn't tell you anything else, then Peter, you're going to make that however you like. And we don't know whether Jan's going to get it with milk or with any sugar in, those kind of things. We don't know whether he's going to like that cup of coffee or absolutely hate it and spit it out. So we need to remove any ambiguity from our processes so that people know what they're doing and how to follow them. Checklists are a great thing to use to keep yourself organized. I run my life by checklists, and yes, that sounds pretty sad, and maybe it is, but it keeps me organized, particularly in an environment when many people work from home and there's many distractions. There are many things that you can do with your time. If there are certain things which need to be done every single day or periodically, then the checklist will help you to remember. Also, they will help you to make sure that you've done the things and you're not relying on memory.
So can I just say that I am really not an expert at organization of any kind, but I just feel compelled to say that the only time when I actually feel like I've accomplished and is when I do checklists. They save my life. And you don't need to use any fancy tool. I use my notes. My dog still proclaiming her joy for life. So I use notes on my Mac, and I use the tick thing, and there's nothing that satisfies me so much as ticking. So today I made quite a few ticks, and I'm so happy. And actually, because it forces you to focus on the tasks, and you do them. And I couldn't agree more. And this comes from someone who's not good at this. So in a way, it's even more valuable. If you see what I mean. If you see my sort of weird, Sorry for the interruption.
You're right, but the thing is, Peter, I would actually completely agree. I would not really call myself the most organized of people in the world, but I've trained myself to be organized because I do things like using checklists. And I mean, I kid you not, I have a I have a pre-work checklist that includes things like brushing my teeth. And I know that sounds stupid, and it sounds like something that you wouldn't forget, but by having that checklist there, it ensures that I don't. And there are things on there that I do sometimes miss. For example, I take medication in the morning. I might miss something if I didn't have that on my checklist. So it's really helpful. And then when I start my day, I have a startup checklist of the things that I need to check in the business each day.
I need such a checklist, by the way. As soon as I got my daughter, brushing the teeth before I fired up the computer was a luxury.
There you go. Yeah, well, checklist can help in all walks of life. And then the thing which kind of, to an extent, goes hand in hand with checklists, but it's kind of more broadly about defining the things in your business that are going to help your team to understand, like put them into context, and understand the things which are important, and that is creating standards. And what I mean by that, it'll probably help if I give you an example. One of the things which I'm going to show you in a moment is we have in our team communication standards, and what that means is we're going to explain how we communicate, the tone for communication, when we need to communicate, and all those things which, if they're not defined, people don't necessarily know how they should handle those things. And it might sound straightforward. Okay, communication is just talking to people. But if you don't explicitly state, okay, right, well, in our team, okay, we check for communication on a daily basis, or sometimes more often than that, depending on what it is that we're doing. You need to think about, okay, well, what is my normal workflow, and where does communication fit in with that? And you start to see how, if everybody was just doing things in their own way, then you have a very inconsistent level of service. So that's why it's important to have things like communication standards. You also have things like coding standards as well. Okay, well, this is specifically how we set out PHP or CSS, those kind of things, and that's important when you're working with a team, because if people have, say, disorganized code, then it can be very difficult when another team member has to go in on the same project and figure out what somebody has done. So it's inefficient, and it can just lead to problem after problem. So you have to be very organized with your code, and some people are not particularly organized. And so having those standards in place helps you to get it right. So the last thing I should say on that is that once you've got your processes, religiously follow them. But here's the thing: if something isn't working, change it. Be quick to adapt the processes when it's necessary. And you need to look at this and say, okay, right, well, if this person isn't following the process, why are they not following it? Is it because there is some friction with that particular thing that you've told them to do? Are they finding a shortcut because there's a problem with the process? It might be that you need to have a conversation with that person to get them back on track, but it might also be that the process itself is at fault and you need to update it so that there's no need to create a shortcut or go off plan and do your own thing. So that's why it's important to follow the processes, but also be willing to change them to get them right. So I said before that we use some things, and I just want to give you a couple of examples of our processes in practice. And I mentioned before that we have communication standards. This is something within one of the tools that we use with our team. See this, and we've actually only recently put this in place, and it outlines why we have communication standards, when to communicate, and there's a whole bunch more which you can't see there because you need to scroll down. And then on the right hand side there is an example of a startup checklist which our guys follow. The specific items on there are perhaps not going to make much sense to you, but that kind of relates to another workflow that we use within Elite when we're working with clients. And obviously a project has different statuses that we go through, and we define those statuses. So it's important that we check things in the status that they're at and so on, which is why we've got those particular items on there. But you can see how what a checklist looks like in practice. So we've covered a lot so far. So I want to move on now and get away from the dry topic for the moment of processes. And I promised before that I was going to answer this particular question. What is the number one mistake that agency owners make that derails efficiency and holds back growth? And that is taking on every single project that you're offered. And you might think, well, that's crazy. Taking on projects is what we live for. And to an extent, yes, you're right. But taking on every single project that might come your way isn't necessarily the smartest thing to do. So here's why it's okay to say no. You have to remember your time and resources are finite, and you can only put your energy into certain things, and you should be selective about the things that you are taking on. Really what this comes down to is a decision around whether you specialize or generalize. And I would always be an advocate of focusing on a particular niche or vertical and going deep on that. And like I said there, you can't go deep into every single niche platform or product. So it is okay to turn down work that does not fit with your ideal set of circumstance or your ideal project. Now that doesn't mean that you should cut your nose off to spite your face. Yes, I recognize that people need projects to survive, and although it's outside the scope of this webinar, obviously how you go about getting those more specific projects that I'm talking about in a particular vertical comes down to your marketing and how you position yourself in that particular industry. And there's lots which we could talk about there, but like I say, it's kind of outside the scope of this particular webinar. But
that's what we covered. Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to plug one webinar that covers that. We did one with Michael Killen the other day. You can find it on the Cloudways fan page on Facebook. If you just search for Michael Killen, he walks you through the process of selling 5-figure funnels. Okay, awesome. Yeah, maybe that probably doesn't put me in too good a light because obviously I didn't see that particular webinar. So apologies for that. It's not your job to know the webinars. That's what we
exactly. It definitely isn't. We do too many anyway.
You guys do great work on a lot of webinars. So
thank you
for putting your time and effort into them, which is helping a lot of people. So yeah, it's not easy to plan for things that you have little or no knowledge of. So sometimes it can be better to focus on the things where you can add value. If you're not comfortable that you can add value, then there's a question mark over whether it's something you should be taking on. In my experience, I generally see that people that put themselves out more as generalists tend to compete more on price than those that are specialists in a particular area, and that can be challenging, particularly if you are, obviously you in a global environment, competing on price, in my opinion, is probably not the smartest thing to be doing. So that's why I think it is okay to say no to some projects and focus on getting the right things instead. So let's say you've done all this work. You've got a great environment in place. You've got your processes in place. You've put your marketing in place. You've listened to the other webinar, which I haven't watched. And you know exactly what you're doing. Now you're getting tons of work in. And now you've got a problem. You cannot do it all by yourself. There are only so many hours in the day. So what are you going to do about that? Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you what not to do. Do not turn down good projects that are a great fit for you just because you have hit capacity. That is an immensely solvable problem. Similarly, do not subcontract where you've got no assurance of the standards. Remember that I said before about the importance of having that vision and those values in place. and aligning yourself with people that share those values. This is where it becomes very, very tricky when you outsource work on freelance platforms like Upwork and Fiverr and places like that. And I just want to be clear. I know you can find great people on those platforms, but equally, it's very easy for things to go wrong using people on those platforms. So it's more about, well, what can I do that puts me in the strongest possible position than exposing yourself to risk. When you work with an individual on a platform such as Upwork, first of all, they only have finite availability. They only have finite levels of skill or expertise in a particular thing. And on a project, it might be a multidisciplinary project where you need someone like Peacher to come in and do all your UX work, or you might need a back-end developer to come in and do some programming to put together some functionality that the project necessitates. You might need a really good front-end person that's going to put in place all kinds of fancy things that the client's demanded, although you probably shouldn't be accepting that kind of thing anyway, but that's another thing. And it's very difficult to find all that in one person, first of all, and then things like availability come into it. This person is likely going to have other projects on. You don't know if they're going to be available once the project's complete, if there's things that need to be revisited down the line. Ultimately, you don't know the quality. And it's very difficult in a platform like that to know for sure whether they are aligned with your values. And that's why I generally caution against those. But I don't want to say that there are no good people out there, because I know there are. But it's just one of those things I would say experience would lead me to believe that it's not the best thing to do. And there are alternate solutions that you could consider. Finally, do not pet angry cats, particularly when you're in a bad place. All manner of calamitous outcomes will ensue. So let's move on. How do we then solve our capacity issues? Okay, so there are really a couple of ways that you can go about this. And obviously, like I've said, there are the various freelancing platforms that I've already mentioned. So I'm not counting those as one of the things here. So you could either hire internally, and that might be good for you in some cases when you are scaling your business, but it does very much kind of depend on your circumstances whether that is the right thing to do. Alternatively, you could partner with a team. And although I promise this is not going to turn into a pitch fest, because that's not the point of kind of putting out useful experience and sharing wisdom as I'm trying to do in this webinar, but it would be remiss of me if I did not mention that Elite is one such team that you can partner with when you have development needs. So
there's the URL, by the way.
Thank you very much.
The URL is on the screen right now, theme.co/elite.
Yeah, so by all means, feel free to check us out. I am not saying that we are the only solution, but I would certainly like to say that I believe we are a great solution for many people. We do not work with everybody, just as I've kind of suggested that you guys need to find the right fits in terms of projects. We also find the right fits in terms of the people that we choose to take on with clients, and that's because we want to make sure that we are always delivering a very high standard of service. And if we took on every single thing that came our way and every single client, we wouldn't be able to guarantee that. So partnering with a team is another option. And like I say, it's about focusing on the values and the capabilities, knowing the things that you need and finding that. And it's easy to find that in a team where you might have, like in our case, we have design capability, we have back-end developers, we have front-end developers, and so on. And depending on what you need in a partner, you need to first of all ask yourself, okay, well, what are those particular technical requirements that I'm looking for? Am I using a specific platform? Am I building everything on Shopify? If you're using Shopify, then work with a team that specializes in Shopify. If it's WordPress, find a team that does primarily their work on WordPress, and so on. And look at the values of that team. Are they aligned with your own? Because if there's a mismatch in values, then you're going to find it very difficult to collaborate with these on a long-term basis. Obviously, it always makes sense to have a commercial sense check. Does it make sense? Is it commercially viable for me to do business with this particular team or to hire somebody internally? Not always easy when you're going from being a sole operator to hiring your first person in-house. Often you need a bit of a stepping stone, and that's where sometimes partnering with a team can be a better option for you. But either way, you need to look at the commercials and see whether it is practical for you to do that. Whichever way you go, always make sure that you've got an opportunity to test the water first. Now that could be, well, I'm going to work with this team on one particular project. If that goes well, I'll continue working with them. Similarly, if you hire somebody, then you need to make sure that you're taking them on initially on a trial basis so that you can see their work firsthand and see if they are a good fit for your business. Whichever way you go, have a long-term perspective. And I think that hopefully speaks for itself. So finally, because I know this is one of the things which is asked about, right? Specific tools and what do you use for this, and what are the things are important to measure and that kind of thing. So this is just, I guess, some tenets for success, as the slide says. So obviously, performance matters. You need to start by asking yourself some questions. What does success look like for you? It might look different to you than it does for me. How can you measure what is a quality output in your business? What is a successful web design project? Is it about speed? Is it about it being pixel perfect? Is it about it being tied to specific kind of revenue objectives that you set with the clients that you're working with? Is it about things like reducing bounce rate? What are the metrics which are important for your business or for your project? Then it's really about, well, actually, what are the tools which are going to make it easier to monitor those KPIs or key performance indicators? And what are the key metrics which are actually making a difference for you? There's an old saying, revenue is vanity and profit is sanity. It's very easy to look at things, look at data, and think, oh, this is great. Look at all this data I've got. It's fantastic. And these numbers look amazing. This number is higher than it was last week. That's great. But is it great? It might not be. You've got to understand, well, what are the key things which are actually making a difference in your business? And above all, ignore shiny things. If you take one thing from this webinar, it is that. Ignore shiny things. It's very, very easy to fall into the trap of, well, this is the tool that everybody is talking about, and this one has got these features, and that's great. Well, ask yourself, do I need these features? Is this actually important? Is it going to make a significant difference for us? It comes down to, well, what are the business requirements? Jan, you might remember when we spoke a few months back, and we talked a little bit about project management platforms then, and I told you at that point we were using a platform called Monday.
Yep.
And actually, it was great for us initially, but I got to the point where I realized, well, we had outgrown Monday, and I had to.
I noticed on the screenshot, it said ClickUp on the screenshot.
Yeah, exactly. So I noticed that. Some of the things, really, because of the growth of Elite, I realized there were things that we just couldn't get out of Monday, and so we had to make a change. And so I had to then answer all these questions myself in Elite. Okay, well, what were the things that were important? And actually, one of the key things for us at that time was about being able to have a unified overview of every single task and project from one place. And that was really because of the way that we were set up. And it's because when we were working with multiple clients and each client has their own project board within that platform, we needed to be able to see all of the projects across those project boards in one place. And it sounds simple, but we couldn't do that easily in Monday. So what we were actually doing is we were having to duplicate things. And as you've probably already got by now, that's very inefficient.
Yeah, and it's error prone too, because you have to manage duplicates then.
Exactly. And me looking at this as a business leader, I don't personally manage every single project, but I still need to be able to kind of see at a glance what's going on. So one of the things that I was finding is that it would be little things like, well, if a task has been duplicated or a project's been duplicated, and like one of the guys has set up the duplicate in a different area where we can see, if that has a slightly different name, as would happen from time to time, I certainly don't have a clue if what I'm looking at what it actually relates to. And so it's very easy for things to fall through the cracks then. And then that's when your standard of service can drop and things can get missed because just because you don't have that clarity in there. So I determined that one of the key things that we needed was to have this unified overview, and that's why we eventually moved. So we moved away from Monday and we moved to ClickUp. So I'll tell you the things that I use, but like I said all along, take these with caution because there are many tools which are capable of doing fantastic jobs for you, but it very much has to be based on what you need that tool for and what you're looking for from that tool. The first thing isn't a tool, but it's a metric. And I'll put a little bit of context behind this. When I first started taking care of our support team, we were in a bit of a transition on the theme support side because the business had grown. It had become more complicated because initially we had one theme X, and then we brought out another theme called Pro. There was a lot more demand, and the complexity of those support tickets had gone up as well because there was more complexity in the theme itself. And so we were under pressure at that point. So I had to kind of take stock of where we were at and kind of look at, okay, well, what has worked before will no longer work for us now. And I need to make changes in the business here to improve the position that we're in so that we can deliver fantastic support. And one thing that I came up with then was this idea of a quality score. And what that basically is okay, well, we kind of did we looked at a cross section of all the support tickets which we're handling, and we determined, well, what are the things which are important to get right every single time we respond to a customer support ticket. And so we came up with this kind of matrix of these are the things. This is what a good support ticket response looks like, and this is what a bad response would look like. And then we're going to take a sample of those tickets which we've answered and score them. And we're going to use that as a barometer of how well we're doing. And initially when that came in, we saw that there was inconsistencies across the team. But the more that we talked about what quality looked like for us, and everybody got on the same page, that quality score went up and up and up. And now we, and this might not make a huge amount of sense to you, but as a percentage base, we've had quality scores exceeding 95% for probably about 18 months in a row. As high as, I want to say 97% at one point. And And that's just simply because we looked at the things which were really, really important to get right from a support perspective, and then we determined that we could measure that on an ongoing basis and train the guys to be carrying this out in practice. So that quality score for us is a great metric for us to adhere to, and it's actually something now which I'm looking at. Okay, well, how do we translate this onto the elite side as well? Because you can still determine the success of how how a task or a project was handled, and it will be looking at things like, okay, well, did we hit all of those standards which we talked about in terms of communication and coding and those kind of things. So you can apply that to your own business by determining, well, what are the key things which I need to be aware of? What's going to move the needle for us in terms of better outcomes? How do I define what that looks like, and then score it and use that then as a barometer to check over time how you're tracking against that particular metric. Another thing that might be particularly useful for you to monitor things like billable hours. That's particularly useful for us because, again, from a scalability perspective, you have to remember that Elite is a white label agency for other agencies, and for us to scale that up efficiently, what we need to know is, okay, well, how many billable hours are we working through per person per day? That's a critical metric for us. And of course, there's nuance to that, because it's, okay, well, just because an hour is billable, well, is that a good use of time? Well, that's something else that you need to look at. But as a barometer of how well we're doing with something, if one person was billing 7 hours per day and another 2, well, that that you've got a problem there. So that's why we look at billable hours. And then ClickUp, as I've just said, we use for project management. TickTick is my tool of choice for checklists and to-dos. But again, the important thing is that you put these things in place rather than the tool that you actually use. And then communication, again, whatever works best. When we have meetings, we either use Skype or Zoom, and we use Slack a lot for day-to-day internal communication. And whatever allows you to communicate in the most efficient and easy way, and actually encourages you to do it, because communication is essential, that is the right tool.
100%. And so, sorry to interrupt, Matt, just a very quick heads up that we are already over time, and we want to be a little bit fair to the other guests that we had so far. But in terms of communication, it just goes to show that given that the viewer count is stable, we seem to be communicating quite well in this webinar.
Well, that's good to know. And you will be pleased to know that I am pretty much now at the end. I know we've covered a lot in this, and I hope that it's been useful for people. So let's wrap up. Let's bring it all together, and we kind of look at the things which we've covered, and look at it now in focus. We need to start with a vision. Come up with a culture for your business, and once you've got that in place, do not compromise on it at all. I personally believe if you want to scale, you need to specialize rather than generalize. You need to document and refine your processes. And that's really important from the perspective of specialization versus generalization, because if you are constantly doing new things, how can you put in place a consistent approach to that particular task or project? You can't, because it's new to you. So the key to scaling is having that predictability and consistency, and that's where specialization will really be your friend. So document, refine your processes, set the standards, and uphold them. Everybody in the team needs to be working towards those standards. Either hire internally or partner for growth, but the key thing is to find the right person or team, and then proactively measure and monitor KPIs, key performance indicators. And that is it. If you want to contact me, This is how you do it. And that's all I've got to say.
That was a fantastic presentation. And friends, if you are still watching and you have questions left open, this is how you get in touch with Matt. I highly recommend talking to him, even if you don't have any questions or if you don't plan to hire somebody in the future, because he's just an awesome dude and he's sharing his experience. I can speak from firsthand experience. So Matt is a very helpful person. Highly recommend you get in touch with him. Peter, where do people get in touch with you?
You get in touch with me on LinkedIn, Piccianeri, or on Twitter. I'm just, for the simplicity of it, it's just Piccia, Piccia.
And what's the website of your summit that's coming up?
Yes, it's designforconversions.com/registration. Go register. Do it now.
It's made for you guys. It's made for people who want to make more money using UI and UX, refining your skills. Highly recommend attending that free conference. If you want to get in touch with myself, the best place is Twitter currently at I am Jan Koch, or virtualsummitmastery.com if you want to learn more about virtual summits. Lee's website, to give him respect, is Agency Trailblazer. That's the best place, I think, to point people toward if you want to learn more about Lee. Friends, thank you so much for watching. Again, if you caught the replay, let us know in the comments. Type replay. If you have questions while watching the replay, we'll still get them answered for you. So just put them in the comments as well. Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye.